Good Shabbat, everybody. Welcome to the sacrament of Shabbat. Today, our discussion is about the book of Isaiah, and this is part 26 of a series. So, we're on chapter 30 of the book of Isaiah, and this is verses 1 through 3 from chapter 30 of Isaiah. And it's about God's rebellious kids. Isaiah prophesies, "O rebellious children, says the Lord, who carry out a plan, but not mine, who make an alliance, but against my will, adding sin to sin, who set out to go down to Egypt without asking for my counsel, to take refuge in the protection of Pharaoh, and to seek shelter in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore, the protection of Pharaoh shall become your shame, and the shelter in the shadow of Egypt, your humiliation." So there are a couple ideas here that are really interesting. And when you go back and read the whole chapter 30, which I hope that you will, of the book of Isaiah, you'll get more in-depth analysis on these statements. For every class that I do, I don't read the whole chapter to you. The idea is that over the course of Shabbat, you'll go in and you'll open up your Bibles and you'll read the whole of chapter 30 with placing some emphasis perhaps in the verses that we cover on the sacrament of Shabbat. So here, Isaiah is prophesying, or he's a channel of God, of Yahweh, of Adonai. And God is saying that his Jewish children are rebellious, for they carry out plans that are not mine. They are not God's. And you've made this alliance with the Pharaoh of Egypt. And that is accepting somebody else's role other than the Malkuth, or the rulership of God. So that's the first no-no, is that you're accepting rulership of some other being other than Adonai, other than Yahweh, the God of Israel. So that's an issue. And number two, you didn't seek my counsel. You didn't come to my prophet Isaiah, or any other prophet that may have been around at the time of Isaiah that was authentic in the eyes of Isaiah himself, who wrote this. So you didn't get my okay before you went ahead and you took refuge in the protection of Pharaoh instead of the protection of Yahweh. So you're seeking something lesser than God. And not only that, but Pharaoh worships other gods and goddesses. So in a sense, you're also tangentially seeking protection from those gods that protect Pharaoh and allow for his abundance, so on and so forth. Because you have to understand that technically in ancient Judaism, they weren't monotheistic. Everybody in that part of the world believed in many gods, many gods. There were gods for everything. Every nation had its own gods, and those nations had tree gods and sky gods and heaven gods, so on and so forth, and goddesses. And that's why the commandment says, "You shall have no other gods before me." It wasn't that the Jewish people back then, in these ancient days of Judaism, in this prophetic era, it's not that they didn't believe in different gods or that other gods could exist. It is that they were only meant to follow Yahweh, God of Israel. So technically, the Jews weren't monotheistic. They knew other gods and goddesses existed. Hence the commandment, "Have no other gods before me," right? So the thing is that they only showed obedience to, only had trust and faith and fidelity with the God of Israel. And by taking refuge in the God of Israel, the children of Israel, of God, were protected and were given abundance and protected with health and so on and so forth. So it's very uncertain who the Pharaoh here is intended to be. The supreme power over Egypt was probably at the time in the hands of Tirkakah from 2 Kings 19:9. But Lower Egypt seems to have been ruled by various princes, the chief of whom was Shabbatok. And any one of these may have been regarded by Isaiah as quote unquote Pharaoh. This is cited from the pulpit commentary. So here to the left is a bust or a sculpture of the head of Tirkaka, who was mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 19. And kids, they just do not listen, right? So Isaiah 30, verses 9 through 10. For they are a rebellious people, faithless children, children who will not hear the instruction of the Lord, who say to the seers, do not see, and to the prophets, do not prophesy to us what is right. Speak to us smooth things, prophecy illusions. I leave the way, turn aside from the path. Let us hear no more about the Holy One of Israel. So Isaiah here is prophesying against the people of Israel, against God's children, so to speak. He's saying that they don't want to hear the instruction of the Lord. Whenever a seer or a prophet encourages them to make teshuvah, to return to the way of God that is outlined in Torah, they don't want to hear about being obedient. They don't want to hear about trusting in God. They don't want to hear about the same old talks heard in synagogues and in the temple. They wanted to hear something easy. Just tell us something nice. Tell us something good about the future. Tell us about how good everything will become. And this is how people are with spiritual masters of today, too. I have a great living spiritual master. And instead of asking her how best to come into communion with God, many people will just ask her about day to day living. Can you please help me with my child so that they could pass their college exams? Can you please help me with my health or my job, or my wife or my husband is giving me problems? There's all these things that weigh on us in the everyday mundane life. And we tend to want great spiritual teachers or masters, such as prophets or seers that are alluded to here in the Hebrew Testament in the book of Isaiah. We often ask them to just smooth things out in this illusory, transitory world. Help us to pray on behalf of God that things turn out okay in the mundane world, in my everyday life. But I don't want to hear any more about what the Holy One of Israel wants. I just want you to tell me about what I want. Is money going to come? Are we going to have our own sovereignty in our country politically? So, in other words, the people weren't seeking out God's will, they were seeking out their will. And therein lies the problem. So Isaiah 30, 15 through 16 says, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. But you refused and said, no, we will flee upon horses. Therefore you shall flee. And we will ride upon swift steeds. Therefore your pursuers shall be swift. This can be read historically, and it could also be read in a very spiritual, mystical sense, because all true scriptural sayings can be read on a historical level or face value. They could also be read in a sense of giving instruction spiritually to people, and they could also be interpreted mystically. So let's look at this from a historical perspective according to what Isaiah was trying to get across in the entirety of the first part of the book of Isaiah, chapters 1 through 40. In returning in rest, you shall be saved. So, in other words, in making teshuvah, in returning to the way of God, you shall find rest, and you'll be saved by God spiritually and politically and militarily. All these things we've been talking about for all these weeks. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. Quietness means to reflect. And during Shabbat, we seek a quietness, a stillness, a trust in the way of God. So in quietness and in trust shall be your strength. So trust in the way of God. Do the way of God. Don't be rebellious. And be quiet. Don't speak against God. And also be still and know that I'm God. Meditate in silence on the omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence of God. But you, the people of Israel, refused and said, no, we will flee upon horses. We're going to run away from invaders into our land, such as the Assyrians from the Babylonian Empire. But no, because you didn't trust in the way of God, God allowed the Assyrians to take over Jerusalem, to destroy it, to destroy the first temple, to put the Jews into exile in the famous Babylonian diaspora. The spiritual and mystical element of this saying is that if you return to the way of God and rest in a meditative or prayerful attitude, you shall be saved from negative thoughts, negative words, negative deeds. In quietness, reflecting on God, meditating on God, and in trust in doing the way of God outlined in Torah, you shall have strength. But if you don't do this and you try to flee away from the teaching of God, then your negative thoughts, your negative words, and your negative deeds will continue to chase you. And they shall be swift. You'll not be able to run away from yourself. In order to transcend the lower tendencies of the mind, we have to follow a way. And that way is Torah in ancient Judaism. And also in Christianity, following the Torah is the way. Jesus said that not one word, not one letter should any of my disciples leave off. They should focus on fulfilling Torah. So even Jesus, in the so-called Christian Testament, spoke highly of Torah, and he encouraged his disciples to make a return to the way of God outlined in Torah. Though Jesus interpreted Torah in a very revolutionary way from his Pharisaical contemporaries and the people that were called Sadducees, he didn't agree with them either. Even though he had a revolutionary interpretation or outtake through his halakha of Torah, he still felt that his disciples should follow Torah fully, not man-made laws, but those laws that were truly inspired by God. So God is gracious. Here we get some hope, because the last few chapters, and many of the chapters even before the last few chapters, were pretty dark, where Isaiah was predicting the downfall of the children of Israel, and he was predicting very bloody wars in different countries inspired by Yahweh, etc. Now we see that God is gracious, that if you just make a return to the way of God, or if you just trust in God, God waits for you to make that teshuvah, for you to return to him, to return to the way of his teachings. And he waits to be gracious, to bless you in your return. So Isaiah 30, 18 through 22 says, therefore the Lord waits to be gracious to you. Therefore he will rise up to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. Truly, O people in Zion, inhabitants of Jerusalem, you shall weep no more. He will surely be gracious to you at the sound of your cry. When he hears it, he will answer you. Though the Lord may give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet your teacher will not hide himself anymore, but your eyes shall see your teacher. And when you turn to the right or when you turn to the left, your ears shall hear a word behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. Then you will defile your silver-covered idols and your gold-plated images. You will scatter them like filthy rags. You will say to them, away with you. So here, God waits to be gracious to those who will turn away from other idols, other gods and goddesses who will come and rely on his protection and mercy alone. That's what Isaiah is referring to here. And you'll weep no more if you just turn back to the way of God. You'll be blessed by him. That's what Isaiah is predicting here. And though the Lord may give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, your teacher will not hide himself anymore, but your eyes shall see your teacher. This teacher is God. And this poetic way of speaking is seeing God in Torah. Your teacher will not hide himself anymore from you, because your eyes shall be open, your ears shall be open to hearing, seeing, studying Torah. But your eyes shall see your teacher in the words and the teachings of Torah. So, and when you turn to the right or turn to the left, meaning you turn away from Torah, you turn away from the way of God, you'll hear your inner intuition, which is God speaking. This is the way. Walk in it. Don't look to the left. Don't look to the right. Keep like a horse with blinders on. Focus on the way. Focus on me. And I will take you to the highest levels of God consciousness. And once you have faith and fidelity and loyalty and obedience to the God of Israel, you'll throw away all their images and say, away with you. God is gracious, continued. Because of this, because of your faithfulness of adhering to the way of God, even in the Babylonian diaspora, Isaiah 30:31, the Assyrian will be terror-stricken at the voice of the Lord when he strikes with his rod. So God, according to Isaiah, in many passages of the book of Isaiah, not just this one, alludes to the fact that when more children of Israel at the time of Isaiah make a way, a return to God, then God will send a hero. They actually call him Messiah or Anointed One in the Hebrew Testament. Just listen to earlier classes, we already covered it. So the Babylonian Empire conquered Jerusalem, destroyed the first temple of Solomon, and exiled many, if not all, Jews into the Babylonian diaspora. But whenever those were faithful to God, when they remained faithful to the way and they waited on God to come and help them, God sent Cyrus the Great, seen here to the left. He was the Persian emperor. And this Persian emperor, who was not a Jew, was referred to as Messiah by the prophet of Isaiah, anointed by God to do God's work. Yeah? So, in other words, Cyrus was a more broad-minded conqueror. He conquered the Babylonian Empire, and then the Jewish Babylonian diaspora became part of the Persian Empire. And it was Cyrus the Great who said that the Jewish people could go back to Jerusalem if they wanted and rebuild, and that they could also rebuild a second temple, which they ultimately did. And that second temple, Jesus later predicted would fall in 70 AD at the hands of the Roman Empire. So the reason why the Assyrians were conquered by this Persian emperor, Cyrus the Great, is because of the faith of the Jewish people, those that did keep fidelity with God. And as you've seen in other chapters, those that did not keep fidelity with God were allowed to be destroyed by different military invasions and died on their way through exile or were enslaved because of their disobedience. This is the idea that Isaiah has been teaching for some time. So the overall idea, even in many, if not all, Jewish sects of today's world, is that when you follow the way of Torah, when you're obedient to God, when you trust in God, everything will go well, or at least will go smoother in life. If you do not follow the way of God, this leads to negative consequences. One such thing that I've studied in recent months and over the last year and a half or so for my doctoral dissertation is that when you don't follow the way of God, this actually leads to illness, which is the cause of death. As Paul said in his epistles, the wages of sin is death. He was speaking from his Jewish perspective, because you have to remember that Paul was a Jew. He studied under the famous Rav Gamaliel. And he was stating a very important fact that when you don't follow the way of Torah, when you are disobedient, this creates sin, which is a separation from God. And ultimately, when one is critically ill or terminally ill, it's seen that that is due to one's lack of fidelity to Torah, is what a lot of Jewish writings teach. Different rabbinical lore, Haggadah, and so on and so forth, teaches this. So when one makes a return to the way of God, it's believed that you could even be healed and avoid death. Or when you make a return to the way of God, perhaps there's still some sin remaining to be purified, and that can be purified by passing with a dignified death in the grace of God by studying Torah and reciting different prayers and rituals of different sects of Judaism, etc. And of course, this influenced the Christian understanding of it too, which was very similar. Only there wasn't so much of an idea in Christianity, medieval Christianity, in this return to the way of Torah, which is emphasized in Judaism at the time of death. But there's the idea of making sure that you accepted and believed in Jesus Christ. And that was what was most important before death for medieval Christians. But the historical Jesus would have obviously said you need to make a way to the return to the way of Torah. The way of the Torah that I teach, that I exemplify, but still Jesus would not have said you had to have faith in me to be saved at the moment of death. He would have encouraged, as any proto-rabbinical teacher would have taught, to make a teshuvah the way, make a teshuvah, which is a return to the way of God. Second cup of blessing. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, beloved Abba, Yahweh, Adonai, may all the divine names be praised. Help us all to trust in you, to rest in you on this Shabbat, to find quiet as our strength. May we always seek to fulfill the divine way and to purify our hearts, not out of fear of you, Lord, but out of pure love for you. Peace, peace, peace.